From dead-naming celebrities to getting owned by comedians, Jordan Peterson is the kind of guy you either love or hate. Today, I'll be showing you some of the times when the Canadian psychologist got into feuds with actual celebrities, and I'm starting with one of his most memorable moments. If you've ever found yourself down a YouTube rabbit hole late at night, chances are you've come across a viral interview between Jordan Peterson and Kathy Newman. The interview, which took place on Channel 4 News in 2018, has been watched millions of times, and it has become one of the most memorable moments in Peterson's career. Newman, a British journalist, came into the interview with a confrontational attitude, and Peterson was more than ready to push back. The result was a heated conversation that had both sides interrupting each other and sparring over topics like the gender pay gap and free speech. Peterson's fans saw the interview as a triumph, with the clinical psychologist coming across as intelligent and composed in the face of what they saw as Newman's aggressive tactics. There were critics, however, who accused Peterson of dodging questions and using slippery language to avoid giving straight answers. Regardless of where you stand on the issue, there's no denying that the interview was a spectacle to behold. It's been parodied countless times, with comedians and internet personalities alike poking fun at both Newman's approach and Peterson's arguments. In the end, the interview served to further cement Peterson's status as a lightning rod for controversy. Love him or hate him, it's hard to deny that he knows how to make headlines. But it's not just journalists Peterson feuds with, it's also Hollywood stars. In this case, we have Olivia Wilde versus Jordan Peterson. It all started when Wilde claimed that Chris Pine's character in her movie Don't Worry Darling was based on Peterson, whom she referred to as a pseudo-intellectual hero to the incel community. For those who don't know, incels are a group of mostly white men who believe that they are entitled to every woman. Yeah, not the most enlightened bunch. Anyway, Wilde went on to say that Peterson legitimizes certain aspects of the incel movement, mainly because his former professor status, authorship, and penchant for suits. Naturally, Peterson was asked about these accusations during an episode of Piers Morgan Uncensored, and at first he didn't seem too bothered by them. He simply replied, "Sure, why not?" before dismissing it as a low-level insult. But things took an emotional turn when Peterson started talking about the disaffected young men he's been speaking to, and how marginalized people are supposed to have a voice. He even got a bit teary-eyed when he spoke about how many people are dying for lack of encouragement and how easy it is to provide it. So where do we stand on this feud? Well, it's hard to say. On the one hand, Wilde's comments were pretty harsh, and Peterson has every right to defend himself. On the other hand, Peterson's message about helping marginalized groups is an important one, and we shouldn't discount it just because we may not agree with everything he says. But around the same time, Dr. Peterson was getting into even more trouble. Remember the time Twitter suspended Dr. Peterson's account after he made some comments about Elliot Page, a transgender actor who previously went by the name Ellen Page? Apparently, one of Peterson's tweets broke Twitter's guidelines on hateful conduct, and the offending message has been making the rounds online. In it, he apparently made a reference to Page's surgery and used his previous name, an act commonly known as dead-naming in the trans community. Now, before we get too deep into this, let's take a step back and talk about who Elliot Page is. You may remember him from the movie Juno, but more recently, he's been making waves as the star of the Netflix series Umbrella Academy. In 2020, Page came out as transgender and changed his name from Ellen to Elliot. Peterson is known for having some pretty controversial opinions on a variety of topics, including transgender issues. In fact, he once said on Joe Rogan's podcast that being transgender is like a contagion. Peterson's daughter, Michaela Peterson, also got involved in the drama. She posted screenshots of her father's tweets online and criticized Twitter and Elon Musk, who hadn't even bought Twitter by that point. This isn't the first time Peterson has had a run-in with Twitter either. In May of last year, he announced that he was quitting the platform. He did this in response to being criticized for comments he made about a model on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Yumi Nu, a plus-size model, made her debut on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and boy did it make a splash. Unfortunately, not everyone was happy about it, and one of those unhappy people was none other than Jordan Peterson. In a now-deleted tweet, Peterson said, "Sorry, not beautiful, and no amount of authoritarian tolerance is going to change that." Well, that didn't sit well with Nu's fans, who were quick to call out Peterson for his comments, but Peterson wasn't backing down, telling the Telegraph that his tweet was not a mistake. He went on to argue that using Nu, who he claims is not athletic, was manipulative economically and in relation to the model herself. Nu, for her part, seemed unbothered by the whole thing. In fact, she didn't even bother to respond to Peterson's comments. Instead, she focused on the positive reactions to her cover, which included praise from fans and fellow models alike. In the end, it seems like Peterson's criticism didn't have much impact on Nu or her fans. They were too busy celebrating her groundbreaking Sports Illustrated cover to worry about what one controversial psychologist had to say about it. As for Peterson, well, even many of his fans thought he went way too far this time, and it's easy to see why. The backlash from both his haters and his fans was so immense that he announced he would be temporarily leaving Twitter. Of course, he was back to tweeting just a few days later, but that's just Peterson. It's clear that Peterson's wit can sometimes be misunderstood, but it's rare to see him be outwitted. But that can happen, and there's no better example of that than his debate with Jim Jeffries. If you haven't heard of Jim Jeffries, he's an Australian comedian who's not afraid to use a certain four-letter word that rhymes with hunt in his routines. He's also the guy who managed to finally shut up Jordan Peterson, a feat that not many have accomplished. In an episode of the Jim Jeffries Show, the comedian decided to take on the controversial Canadian psychologist on the topic of civil rights. He asked Peterson if he thought it was a good idea to force someone to bake a cake for a gay wedding. Unsurprisingly, Peterson said no. But when Jeffries followed up with the question of whether someone should be allowed to deny making a cake for a black couple, Peterson stumbled for words. Jeffries then went on to school Peterson on how the civil rights movement has made society better and asked if he believed that wasn't right. Peterson took a moment to ponder before admitting that maybe he was wrong. It was a rare moment of silence from Peterson, who is known for his outspoken views on a variety of topics. But it just goes to show that even the most controversial figures can be taken down a notch by a well-timed question. Despite their differing opinions, Jeffries and Peterson managed to have a civil discussion, which is more than can be said for some of the other feuds in this list. It's a reminder that even when we disagree with someone, it's possible to have a respectful conversation and maybe even learn something from each other. And those were some of Jordan Peterson's biggest feuds.